In order for you to be able to use 3D in After Effects, you have to turn whatever layer you're working on into a 3D layer. You turn on the 3D layers by switching to Modes in the timeline and clicking on the icon under the cube. As soon as you've turned a layer into a 3D layer, when you select it, the anchor point has three arrows pointing from it. These are your three axes. The green arrow is the y-axis, the red arrow is the x-axis, and the blue arrow, which you can't really see now, is the z-axis because it's pointing straight out towards us. Now I can click and drag and move this around the x and the y-axis as I normally would. If I want to pull it towards me in z-space along its z-axis, I click on the blue arrow and click to the left or the right. And it looks like it's scaling up and scaling down, but it's actually moving backwards and forwards in three-dimensional space. If I toggle open the properties of my layer, I'll see that I have in the transform properties my anchor point and position and scale all have an extra parameter, and that's related to the Z parameter. I also have my rotation split into X, Y, and Z, and I have another parameter called orientation. Orientation and rotation are kind of common in that they deal with the angles that a layer is facing. Orientation just has three degree numbers here. So if you vary any one of these, it will change the direction that it's pointing in either X, Y, or Z space. And the difference between orientation and rotation is that orientation will, if you keyframe an orientation property from one angle to another, when you play back that animation, it will just go through the quickest path between those two angles, whereas with the rotation parameters you can rotate something a number of times before it actually gets to that particular angle. So the reason that you would use the orientation is that if you have a very simple animation that you want to happen smoothly going from one angle to another, whereas if you have complex rotations and spinning and that kind of thing, then you want to use the rotation, and each one of those then can be adjusted simultaneously. Now you have a rotation tool here, and the rotation tool can be set up to either adjust the orientation or the rotation. So if I set it for orientation and, for example, rotate around the y-axis, you'll see that it's adjusting the orientation parameter. Now, if I change that to rotation, you'll see that it's actually affecting the rotation parameter. Okay, so reset those. Now if you want to, again, I think I've just discussed it already, but if you want to move an object, you can use the arrows or you can click and drag on the layer. Now, to give yourself more views from which to look at your 3D space, you can first of all change from what's called the active camera to any one of these front, left, top, back, right, or bottom views. And the active camera is the view that will be rendered out when you create your finished video. So even though we haven't created a camera as such yet, the default view that's going to get rendered is going to be it's what's called the active camera. The other views below the active camera are called the orthogonal views. The orthogonal views allow you to look at, for instance, the layer from the top. Now, because I'm looking straight down on a wafer-thin shape, I can't really see much, but I can still see my axes and I can still see the width of my shape. So if I wanted to know exactly where my object was in Z-space, I would flip to the top view and I'd pull it backwards and forwards in Z-space. Similarly, I could switch to my left and look at it from the side and pull it backwards and forwards. Now if I switch to my front view, it looks a lot like my active camera, but you'll see that if I pull it forward in space, it appears like nothing is happening. That's because it's not going to have any perspective applied to it. It's not going to look like it's moving in a realistic 3D space because it's purely a front view. It's always going to be locked to show the exact front of my shape. If I pull that back into active camera and do the exact same thing, you'll see that it actually moves it in perspective. Now you can look at your active camera or any of your orthogonal views simultaneously by switching to 2 or 4 views. So you can have as many as 4 views available, and you can select any one of these views and decide which one you want to be looking at, and you can have your active camera as one of those views. 4 views is fine, but if you have if you're on a laptop or if you don't have a massive monitor, then it can make it very restrictive in terms of being able to see a large canvas to work on. So what I tend to do is have 2 views horizontal, my right view as my active camera, and then I toggle between all of the different views I need to look at on the left view, or the left hand side rather. So that's how you set up a layer to be a 3D layer, and how you move it around and rotate it in space, and how you look at all of the different viewpoints of your layer.